Sir David Frederick Attenborough, AETENB is an English broadcaster and naturalist. He is best known for writing and presenting the 9 Life series, in conjunction with the BBC Natural History Unit, which collectively form a comprehensive survey of animal and plant life on the planet. He is also a former senior manager at the BBC, having served as controller of BBC Two and director of programming for BBC Television in the 1960s and 1970s. He is the only person to have won BAFTAs for programs in each of black and white, color, HD, and 3D. Attenborough is widely considered a national treasure in Britain, although he himself does not like the term. In 2002, he was named among the 100 Greatest Britons following a UK-wide vote. He is the younger brother of director, producer and actor Richard Attenborough. Early life and family. Attenborough was born in Isleworth, West London, but grew up in College House on the campus of the University College, Leicester, where his father, Frederick, was principal. He is the middle of 3 sons. Attenborough spent his childhood collecting fossils, stones and other natural specimens. He received encouragement in this pursuit at age 7, when a young Jack at a Hawks admired his museum. He also spent a considerable amount of his time in the grounds of the university, and age 11 he heard that the zoology department needed a large supply of newts, which he offered via his father to supply for 3DA newt. The source, which wasn't revealed at the time, was a pond less than 5 meters from the department. A few years later, one of his adoptive sisters gave him a piece of amber filled with prehistoric creatures. Some 50 years later, it would be the focus of his program The Amber Time Machine. In 1936, David and his brother Richard attended a lecture by Grey Owl at De Montfort Hall, Leicester, and were influenced by his advocacy of conservation. According to Richard, David was bowled over by the man's determination to save the beaver, by his profound knowledge of the flora and fauna of the Canadian wilderness, and by his warnings of ecological disaster should the delicate balance between them be destroyed. The idea that mankind was endangering nature by recklessly despoiling and plundering its riches was unheard of at the time, but it is one that has remained part of Dave's own credo to this day. In 1999, Richard directed a biopic of Bellany entitled Grey Owl. Attenborough was educated at Wigston Grammar School for Boys in Leicester and then won a scholarship to Clare College, Cambridge in 1945, where he studied geology and zoology and obtained a degree in natural sciences. In 1947 he was called up for national service in the Royal Navy and spent 2 years stationed in North Wales and the Firth of Forth. In 1950 Attenborough married Jane Elizabeth Ebsworth Oriel. She died in 1997. The couple had 2 children, Robert and Susan. Robert is a senior lecturer in bioanthropology for the School of Archaeology and Anthropology at the Australian National University in Canberra. First years at the BBC. After leaving the Navy, Attenborough took a position editing children's science textbooks for a publishing company. He soon became disillusioned with the work and in 1950 applied for a job as a radio talk producer with the BBC. Although he was rejected for this job, his CV later attracted the interest of Mary Adams, head of the talks department of the BBC's fledgling television service. Attenborough, like most Britons at that time, did not own a television, and he had seen only one programme in his life. However, he accepted Adams' offer of a 3-month training course, and in 1952 he joined the BBC full-time. Initially discouraged from appearing on camera because Adams thought his teeth were too big, he became a producer for the talks department, which handled all non-fiction broadcasts. His early projects included the quiz show Animal, Vegetable, Mineral, and Song Hunter, a series about folk music presented by Alan Lomax. Attenborough's association with natural history programs began when he produced and presented the 3-part series Animal Patterns. The studio-bound programme featured animals from London Zoo, with the naturalist Julian Huxley discussing their use of camouflage, apposematism and courtship displays. Through this programme, Attenborough met Jack Lester, the curator of the zoo's reptile house, and they decided to make a series about an animal collecting expedition. The result was Zoo Quest, first broadcast in 1954, where Attenborough became the presenter at short notice due to Lester being taken ill. In 1957, the BBC Natural History Unit was formally established in Bristol. Attenborough was asked to join it, but declined, not wishing to move from London where he and his young family were settled. Instead, he formed his own department, the Travel and Exploration Unit, which allowed him to continue to front Zoo Quest as well as produce other documentaries, notably the Traveller's Tales and Adventure series. In the early 1960s, Attenborough resigned from the permanent staff of the BBC to study for a postgraduate degree in social anthropology at the London School of Economics, interweaving his study with further filming. However, he accepted an invitation to return to the BBC as controller of BBC Two before he could finish the degree. BBC administration. Attenborough became the controller of BBC Two in March 1965, but had a clause inserted in his contract that would allow him to continue making programmes on an occasional basis. Later the same year, he filmed Elephants in Tanzania, and in 1969, he made a three-part series on the cultural history of the Indonesian island of Bali. For the 1971 film A Blank on the Map, he joined the first Western expedition to a remote island valley in New Guinea to seek out a lost tribe. BBC Two was launched in 1964, but had struggled to capture the public's imagination. When Attenborough arrived as controller, he quickly abolished the channel's quirky kangaroo mascot and shook up the schedule, with a mission to make BBC Two's output diverse and different from that offered by other networks. He began to establish a portfolio of programs that defined the channel's identity for decades to come. Under his tenure, music, the arts, entertainment, archaeology, experimental comedy, travel, drama, sport, business, science and natural history all found a place in the weekly schedules. Often, an eclectic mix was offered within a single evening's viewing. Programs he commissioned included Man Alive, Call My Bluff, Chronicle, Life, One Pair of Eyes, The Old Grey Whistle Test, Monty Python's Flying Circus and The Money Programme. When BBC Two became the first British channel to broadcast in colour in 1967, Attenborough took advantage by introducing televised snooker, as well as bringing rugby league to British television on a regular basis via the BBC Two Floodlit Trophy. One of his most significant decisions was to order a 13-part series on the history of Western art, to show off the quality of the new UHF colour television service that BBC Two offered. Broadcast to universal acclaim in 1969, Civilization set the blueprint for landmark authored documentaries, which were informally known as Tombstone or Sledgehammer projects. Others followed, including Jacob Bronowski's The Ascent of Man, and Alistair Cook's America. Attenborough thought that the story of evolution would be a natural subject for such a series. He shared his idea with Chris Parsons, a producer at the Natural History Unit, who came up with the title Life on Earth and returned to Bristol to start planning the series. Attenborough harboured a strong desire to present the series himself, but this would not be possible so long as he remained in a management post. In 1969, Attenborough was promoted to Director of Programmes, making him responsible for the output of both BBC channels. His tasks, which included agreeing budgets, attending board meetings and firing staff, were now far removed from the business of filming programmes. When Attenborough's name was being suggested as a candidate for the position of Director General of the BBC in 1972, he phoned his brother Richard to confessed that he had no appetite for the job. Early the following year, he left his post to return to full-time program making, leaving him free to write and present the planned natural history epic. Return to broadcasting. After his resignation, Attenborough became a freelance broadcaster and immediately started work on his next project, a pre-arranged trip to Indonesia with a crew from the Natural History Unit. It resulted in the 1973 series Eastwards with Attenborough, which was similar in tone to the earlier Zoo Quests but without the animal collecting element. After his return, he began to work on the scripts for Life on Earth. Due to the scale of his ambition, the BBC decided to partner with an American network to secure the necessary funding. While the negotiations were proceeding, he worked on a number of other television projects. He presented a series on tribal art and another on the voyages of discovery. He also presented a BBC children's series about cryptozoology entitled Fabulous Animals, which featured mythical creatures such as the griffin and kraken. Eventually, the BBC signed a co-production deal with Turner Broadcasting and Life on Earth moved into production in 1976. Life series beginning with Life on Earth in 1979. Attenborough set about creating a body of work which became a benchmark of quality in wildlife filmmaking and influenced a generation of documentary filmmakers. The series also established many of the hallmarks of the BBC's natural history output. By treating his subject seriously and researching the latest discoveries, Attenborough and his production team gained the trust of scientists, who responded by allowing him to feature their subjects in his programs. In Rwanda, for example, Attenborough and his crew were granted privileged access to film Fossey's research group of mountain gorillas. Innovation was another factor in Life on Earth's success. New filmmaking techniques were devised to get the shots Attenborough wanted, with a focus on events and animals that were hitherto unfilmed. Computerized airline schedules, which had only recently been introduced, enabled the series to be elaborately devised so that Attenborough visited several locations around the globe in each episode, sometimes even changing continents mid-sentence. Although appearing as the on-screen presenter, he consciously restricted his pieces to camera to give his subjects top billing. The success of Life on Earth prompted the BBC to consider a follow-up, and 5 years later, The Living Planet was screened. This time, Attenborough built his series around the theme of ecology, the adaptations of living things to their environment. It was another critical and commercial success, generating huge international sales for the BBC. In 1990, The Trials of Life completed the original Life trilogy, looking at animal behavior through the different stages of life. The series drew strong reactions from the viewing public for its sequences of killer whales hunting sea lions on a Patagonian beach and chimpanzees hunting and violently killing a colobus monkey. In the 1990s, Attenborough continued to use the Life strand title for a succession of authored documentaries. In 1993 he presented Life in the Freezer, the first television series to survey the natural history of Antarctica. Although past normal retirement age, he then embarked on a number of more specialized surveys of the natural world, beginning with plants. They proved a difficult subject for his producers, who had to deliver 5 hours of television featuring what are essentially immobile objects. The result, The Private Life of Plants, showed plants as dynamic organisms by using time-lapse photography to speed up their growth. Prompted by an enthusiastic ornithologist at the BBC Natural History Unit, Attenborough then turned his attention to the animal kingdom and in particular, birds. As he was neither an obsessive twitcher, nor a bird expert, he decided he was better qualified to make the life of birds on the theme of behavior. The documentary series won a Peabody Award the following year. The order of the remaining Life series was dictated by developments in camera technology. For the life of mammals, low-light and infrared cameras were deployed to reveal the behavior of nocturnal mammals. The series contains a number of memorable two-shots of Attenborough and his subjects, which included chimpanzees, a blue whale and a grizzly bear. Advances in macro photography made it possible to capture natural behavior of very small creatures for the first time, and in 2005, Life in the Undergrowth introduced audiences to the world of invertebrates. At this point, Attenborough realized that he had spent 20 years unconsciously assembling a collection of programs on all the major groups of terrestrial animals and plants. Only reptiles and amphibians were missing. When Life in Cold Blood was broadcast in 2008, he had the satisfaction of completing the set, brought together in a DVD encyclopedia called Life on Land. In an interview that year, Attenborough was asked to sum up his achievement, and responded, "The evolutionary history is finished. The endeavor is complete. If you'd asked me 20 years ago whether we'd be attempting such a mammoth task, I'd have said, don't be ridiculous. These programs tell a particular story and I'm sure others will come along and tell it much better than I did. But I do hope that if people watch it in 50 years' time, it will still have something to say about the world we live in." However, in 2010 Attenborough asserted that his first Life, dealing with evolutionary history before life on Earth, should also be included within the Life series. In the documentary Attenborough's Journey, he stated, "This series, to a degree which I really didn't fully appreciate until I started working on it, really completes the set." Other documentaries alongside the Life series, Attenborough has continued to work on other television documentaries, mainly in the natural history genre. He wrote and presented a series on man's influence on the natural history of the Mediterranean basin, The First Eden, in 1987. 2 years later, he demonstrated his passion for fossils in Lost Worlds, Vanished Lives. Attenborough narrated every episode of Wildlife on One, a BBC One wildlife series which ran for 253 episodes between 1977 and 2005. At its peak, it drew a weekly audience of 8 to 10 million, and the 1987 episode, Meerkats United, was voted the best wildlife documentary of all time by BBC viewers. He has also narrated over 50 episodes of Natural World, BBC Two's flagship wildlife series. In 1997 he narrated the BBC Wildlife specials, each focusing on a charismatic species, and screened to mark the Natural History Unit's 40th anniversary. As a writer and narrator, he continued to collaborate with the BBC Natural History Unit in the new millennium. Alistair Fothergill, a senior producer with whom Attenborough had worked on the Trials of Life and Life in the Freezer, was making The Blue Planet, the unit's first comprehensive series on marine life. He decided not to use an on-screen presenter due to difficulties in speaking to camera through diving apparatus, but asked Attenborough to narrate the films. The same team reunited for Planet Earth, the biggest nature documentary ever made for television and the first BBC wildlife series to be shot in high definition. In 2011 Fothergill gave Attenborough a more prominent role in Frozen Planet, a major series on the natural history of the polar regions. Attenborough appeared on screen and authored the final episode, in addition to performing voice-over duties. In 2009 he co-wrote and narrated Life, a 10-part series focusing on extraordinary animal behavior, and narrated nature's great events, which showed how seasonal changes trigger major natural spectacles. By the turn of the millennium, Attenborough's authored documentaries were adopting a more overtly environmentalist stance. In State of the Planet, he used the latest scientific evidence and interviews with leading scientists and conservationists to assess the impact of man's activities on the natural world. He later turned to the issues of global warming and human population growth. He also contributed a program which highlighted the plight of endangered species to the BBC's Saving Planet Earth project in 2007, the 50th anniversary of the Natural History Unit. Attenborough is also forging a new partnership with Sky, working on documentaries for the broadcaster's new 3D network, Sky 3D. Their first collaboration was Flying Monsters 3D, a film about pterosaurs which debuted on Christmas Day of 2010. A second film, The Bachelor King 3D, followed a year later, and further collaborations are planned. Current projects: Attenborough has several TV projects in development. He continues his long-running collaboration with the BBC Natural History Unit, introducing and narrating the unit's first 4K production, Life Story, which debuts on BBC One in October 2014. After Life Story, the BBC have indicated that Attenborough is involved in another landmark natural history series, On the Scale of Planet Earth and Frozen Planet. In October 2014, the corporation announced a trio of new one-off Attenborough documentaries as part of a raft of new natural history programs. Attenborough's Paradise Birds and Attenborough's Big Birds will be shown on BBC Two, and Waking Giants, which follows the discovery of giant dinosaur bones in South America, will air on BBC One. The BBC have also commissioned Atlantic Productions to make a three-part, Attenborough-fronted series on the Great Barrier Reef. The series marks the 10th project for Attenborough and Atlantic, and sees him returning to a location he first filmed at in 1957. Attenborough continues his recent partnerships with Sky and UK TV. His next 3D project is Conquest of the Skies, made by the team behind the BAFTA-winning David Attenborough's Natural History Museum Alive, and due to air on Sky 3D at Christmas 2014. A third series of David Attenborough's Natural Curiosities is in production and will be shown on UK TV channel Watch in 2015. On radio, Attenborough has continued as one of the presenters of BBC Radio 4's Tweet of the Day, which began a second series in September 2014.